Hello, my name is Rick McIntyre, and welcome to my portion of the Sedona Wolf Week Conference. We're going to be talking about the two books that I've written about the Yellowstone wolves here. The first one that came out last year was The Rise of Wolf 8, and then in late September it will be The Reign of Wolf 21. We'll talk about both of those very accomplished males. I started in Yellowstone in 1994. That was the year before the reintroduction in 1995. And I would think that many of you are somewhat familiar with that famous story. 3 wolf packs were brought down from Alberta. We're going to be talking about 2 of them. One was known as the Rose Creek Pack and the other the Crystal Creek Pack. The main character in my first book, Wolf 8, was a pup in the Crystal Creek family. There were 4 male pups brought down with the 2 parents, and he was the runt of the litter. He was the little guy. In the acclimation pen where he and his family lived for 2 months, he was picked on and bullied and beaten up by his bigger brothers a lot. But when he and the others were released 2.5 months later, his life got a lot better just because there were more things to do. Now, the other pack that I've already mentioned was the Rose Creek Pack. That was alpha female number 9, her daughter, a pup, number 7. In Alberta, her mate, the father of the pup, had been killed either by hunters or trappers. So the Park Service put in their acclimation pen an unrelated male, number 10, in hopes that they would pair off and get along, and that's exactly what happened. In fact, by the time she was released in March, she was pregnant. Now, after they were released, for some reason, that family started to move east. At a certain point, the very young daughter, who wasn't, was maybe roughly a year old at that point, decided that she was going to set off on her own. She found a mate and established the first naturally forming pack in Yellowstone during the reintroduction period. But we'll continue on with the older wolves. So pregnant number 9 and her new mate number 10, they traveled east, and they apparently didn't realize it, that they passed over the national park border, meaning they were going in an area that was somewhat hostile to having wolves there. And on the very day that she gave birth to 8 pups, a very large litter, number 10 was illegally shot and killed. The guy was caught, he was convicted, he spent time in prison. But the real story was the tough time that that mother wolf was about to have the day that he was shot. So she was a single mother, she had 8 pups, and no help. Young wolf pups have no ability to keep themselves warm, so they have to snuggle up to their mother to maintain a normal healthy body temperature. For her to maintain a normal, adequate milk supply for 8 pups, she would need a lot of food. But to hunt, she would have to leave her family, maybe for a day or 2, maybe make a kill, maybe not. And if the weather had been cold back at the den, it could easily be by the time she got back, some or maybe even all the pups could have died from hypothermia. So it was an impossible situation for that mother wolf. Normally, the National Park Service does not intervene in wildlife situations, but this was different. That one wolf pack family, she and her 8 pups, at that time represented 43% of all the wolves in the Yellowstone area. So they just could not be sacrificed. So an exception was made. Doug Smith and other biologists went out to the site of the den. They captured the mother wolf, they found the den site, and since Doug Smith is very tall, very thin, he had the job of reaching into the den, and one by one he started to pull out pups. There had been a sighting of 8 pups earlier, but after the 7th one that he pulled out, it just seemed that there weren't any more. They had a helicopter standing by, the mother was already tranquilized, ready to go. The other 7 pups were ready to go. So people were telling Doug just to give up. There must only be 7. We got to go. Just leave it alone. But to Doug's credit, he just would not give up. He was convinced that there was one more in there, and he didn't want to abandon whoever that was. So he got a stick, and he started poking it in the far reaches of the den where he couldn't quite reach. And at a certain point, as he poked in this direction, there was something that he was touching that wasn't a rock, it wasn't soil, it had a little bit of give to it. So he borrowed a pair of pliers, which extended his reach. He reached in as far as he could. He closed the pliers. It was on something. And just with a little bit of force, he pulled on it. Whatever was in those pliers pulled the opposite direction, proving that there was an eighth pup. He pulled out the little guy. It was a 2-week-old black male wolf pup that was struggling for all he was worth against this human, the first human he'd ever seen. And the people on the scene felt that that last little pup was the one to grow up to be Wolf 21, and you'll be hearing a lot more stories about him. They flew the family back to the acclimation pen on the north side of Lamar Valley behind the Yellowstone Nemzeti, and the plan was to keep them in the pen for about 6 months or so. By that time, if they would be released, the mother at least had a decent chance of keeping them alive, but it still would be a tough job being a single mother with 8 young pups. That's where our other main character comes back into the story, number 8. So he was about a year old at that point, and in human years, maybe equivalent to a teenager at 16 or 17. And he had found out by that time that his life was a lot better if he spent most of his time alone, especially away from his bigger brothers. Just like a kid who's picked on and bullied all the time tends to be a loner. And that contributed to one of the better parts of the story. We think one day that fall of 1995, number 8 was walking on the north side of Lamar Valley. He probably heard the howling from those wolves. He walked up a creek, and there would have been a moment where perhaps he came around a bend in the creek or a bend in the canyon, and he would have seen something that he'd never seen before in his life. He would be seeing wolves that were actually smaller than he was. There were 2 pups that were already out of the pen. So every day of 8's life, as far as we can figure, he was always the smallest. And now here were pups that were even smaller than him. And we think what happened was an instinct to care for them kicked in immediately, a paternal instinct. He ran over, he befriended the pups. Soon he was playing with them, shared some food. And whether he knew it or not, he was being watched by the mother of those pups, number 9. She was desperate. She needed any kind of help that she could scrounge up. And here is apparently a guy volunteering to join her family. So that's exactly what happened. She admitted him in as her new mate, as the adopted father of those pups. And little 8 now was a big shot alpha male, something we never accepted that he would achieve. And it turned out that he became a great alpha male. I'll jump ahead about 6 months. I was at Sioux Creek one morning in June of 1996. We were watching 8 with his family, with what were now yearlings. He was teaching them to hunt. They killed an elk calf that morning. They were feeding on it. They were getting ready to go back to number 9's den. That spring, she had 3 new pups, but now these were pups that had been sired by 8. So he had been the adopted father of those 8 other pups, and now the biological father of 3 more. But as we watched them getting ready to go back, we were aware that there was a commotion on a ridge that was sloping down toward where the family was. I looked that way and saw that it was one of the new packs from British Columbia that had been brought down a few months earlier and released. It was the Druid Peak pack. And the alpha male in that family, 38, was not just any alpha male. He had previously, after being released, killed 8's father. And 38 was so strong that when he was transported down from Canada, in a metal cage. He tore that cage apart, and they had to recapture him. So 38 was like the King Kong of wolves. I was with a group of people, and I needed to prepare them for what they were about to see. I explained that if two alpha males were to fight, and there was a significant difference in the size, then the fight would be over in just a few moments, with the bigger one winning, ending up in the dominant standing position, the losing, defeated one on his back with his throat exposed. And that's the way that one male kills a rival male at the end of a fight, just biting into the throat. It's guaranteed to be fatal. So I had to explain to these people, if the males were to fight, that's probably what they were going to see. But then I explained that if 8 was smart, what he would do would be to run away. He would make an end run around 38 and the other Druid walls, circle around, get back to where number 9 was with his own 3 pups, and make his stand there, and maybe hopefully 38 and the others would be gone that time. Well, a few moments later, just as I had predicted and told to the folks there, he did start to run. But he was running directly at 38. He had decided that he was going to fight to save those pups that he had adopted. One additional problem that he had to even get to 38, he had to run up a steep ridge. So to even start the fight, he was going to run up that slope, probably be out of breath by the time the fight started. So everything was against him. Both of those males were gray, so as they crashed into each other, they rolled around on the ground together. You couldn't really tell what was happening. They were both similar color. And then finally, as I had predicted within a few moments, it was over, with the dominant wolf standing with a raised tail, biting at will the defeated wolf. But the winner was the little guy. Number 8 somehow, for the first time in his life, had won a fight. It was the most critical moment of his life. How he did it, I don't know, but he did it. So he beat up 38. 38 was at his mercy. The yearlings ran up to see what their adopted father was doing. For sure that would have included 21. I'm sure they were very impressed with what they saw. And what 8 did next was, in a way, even more surprising than winning the fight. He stepped back and he allowed 38 to go. He spared his life. He did chase him out of the territory, but he let him live. So 21 witnessed that. He was right there, probably just a few feet away. And many of you know stories about 21, how he eventually became our greatest male wolf, grew into a giant size. He was the best fighter that we've ever had. As far as we know, he was undefeated in combat, and in many cases had to fight several rival males at once, still won. But despite having never lost a fight over the course of his long life, we're pretty sure that he never killed a defeated opponent. And we think the reason was what he saw that day with what number 8 did with 38. Now, another year went by after that incident. The following year was a tough year for the Rose Creek family. Number 9 chose a denning spot that was essentially a poor location. It was somewhat near the park road. For them to get to their better hunting grounds, they had to cross the road and the flooded Lamar River. Most of the members of that family could not put up with the stress, so they helped a younger female that had a den site in an easier access area. And the only help that she had was from number 8 and her most devoted son, who of course was 21. And by that time, 21 was a little bit over 2 years old. He was a young adult, and he had become a master hunter by that time. He was bigger than 8 at that point as well, but was always very respectful to his adopted father. He would go out on a hunt, bring back food, share it with his mother and his pups. Oftentimes, 8 and 21 would hunt together as a team. And probably the most famous moment from that year involved a pup in number 9's litter who had some health problem. We never quite figured out what was wrong with him. whether it was bad eyesight, bad mental development, poor physical development. But when 21 would come back with food to share with the family, all the other pups would run down with excitement to be fed. I would look uphill, and that pup didn't really seem to either understand what was going on, or if it tried to come down, it would fall over. It just really didn't seem to be able to move around normally. And then we began to notice a pattern in 21. After doing the hard work of going out on a hunt, making a kill, coming back, feeding his mother and the other pups, he would make a special effort to look for that last pup. And then he would trot up there and spend some time with that little guy, just kind of hanging out with him. And just think of what the emotional impact that had. It'd be almost the equivalent of a kid in a hospital being asked by Make-A-Wish what famous athlete he'd like to come and visit him, for that little guy to have his famous big brother come and spend some time with him. So that was an example of the level of empathy that 21 had. Well, 6 months later, 21 had a major change in his life. It was time for him to leave home, set off on himself, and either start his own family or perhaps figure out how he could join an existing pack. And he joined 38's pack, the Druid pack. However, 38 himself had recently died. Like 21's own father, 38 had been illegally shot and killed outside the park. So when 21 left the Slough Creek area, his family's territory, went east into Lamar Valley, into the Druid territory, the adult females and their pups, they took one look at this big new male coming into their territory, and they were just entranced by him. So those females ran over and flirted with him. The pups wanted to meet him. He played with the pups. So within about an hour or so, he was in. But he had no idea what he was getting into, the complications of being the alpha male of the Druid Peak pack. The original alpha female, number 39, was soon to be driven out of the family by one of her adult daughters. 39 had triplets back in British Columbia. They were brought down as pups, triplet daughters. 40 was by far the most aggressive and dominant of the young sisters. So she drove out her mother. She eventually drove out one of her two sisters. That was 41. That made her the new alpha female, even though she was very young. And then she continued on a campaign of dominance to beat up, bully, and I think to try to drive out the last remaining sister. That was Wolf 42. Now, one of the major complications that 21 was facing in this new life he had for himself was we could see from a human perspective that he was really drawn to 42 because they had very similar personalities. It was easy for them to get along with each other, easy for them to get along with the younger members of the pack, but poor 42 had to put up with all this abuse from her sister. What I saw from 21's behavior was that he seemed to have an insurmountable rule or way of living. I'm not sure the exact word to say it, but he would never do anything to harm a female. Now, he certainly had the strength from the side to run over if 42 was being assaulted by her sister, to intervene and physically do something to 40, but he never seemed to be able to do that. He just seemed to be very frustrated in this situation. He appeared to be helpless in understanding what he could do to resolve it. But here's what happened. 42, it turned out, was a very, very intelligent wolf. So she worked out an alliance with some of the younger females in the family over the course of the next few years. And then when the moment was right, when 40 challenged 42 once more, and even we think was about to perhaps kill 42's pups, finally the two sisters had it out. This happened at night. No one saw it, but from evidence I'll mention in a moment, we figured out, we think, as they fought, For sure, 42 would have been losing. She just didn't have that violent streak that her sister did. But her allies, we had reason to believe, they jumped in on her side, and they injured 40 so severely, by the time they let her go, she later died of blood loss. When we found 40, she was just covered with wolf bites all over her body, more than any one wolf could have instilled in her. So that was the proof that it was 42 and her allies. What happened next was that 21 was trying to figure out what he was going to do in this crisis. There were 3 litters of pups that year, 42, 40, and then a third female. So 21 was over at 40's den trying to figure out how he, as an adult male, could keep the pups alive who needed to be nursed. We saw 21 go over to 42's den and bring her back, hopefully to get her to help him care for those pups. They spent about an hour in the thick trees, and we couldn't really see what was happening. But she eventually moved her pups to that central location, got the third mother to transfer her pups there. That was 42's gift. She was very, very good at organizing and managing things. So now, as far as we knew, all 3 litters were there. But now the question was, what would 42 do to her sister's pups after all the abuse that she had suffered from her sister, Would 42 kill 40's pups to prevent any possibility any of them would grow up with their mother's personality? We had to wait months to figure out the answer to that question. An average litter of pups in Yellowstone is about maybe 6 or so. So we eventually saw the 2 surviving mother wolves walk into a small break in the trees in the forest where the pups were. And then we began to see a line of pups follow the mothers across the opening. By the time they were all on the far side, in addition to the 2 mothers, we had a count of 21 pups. So that was the proof that she was raising her sister's pups, despite the bad blood and everything that had happened between those 2 sisters. So for 21, life was so much better now that 40 was gone. And I think many of you understand that the alpha male is not the leader of the pack. That's a myth. It turns out that the alpha female is the wolf in charge. It's fine if you're the alpha male, but that just means that you work for the alpha female. You work for the queen. And as I said, 42's gift was organization. So that made 21's life so much easier. All he had to do were the 2 primary functions in the alpha male, which I would describe this way. Number 1, if your family is threatened, as the alpha male, you're supposed to do something about it. Since 21 was invincible in battle, that was easy for him to deal with. Secondly, if your family is hungry, you're supposed to do something about that. Now, he was a master hunter as well. So for him to lead the hunts, to protect the family, those were easy jobs. And then he left planning, organizing, everything else up to 42, which was his specialty. It was a perfect relationship. And as things got so much better for those adults, we watched how 21 would spend a lot of time playing with the pups. It seemed to be one of his favorite activities. And what I loved about 21 so much, with his great size and strength and fighting ability, what he really enjoyed doing was pretending to lose wrestling matches with the pups. So you'd see this 125-pound alpha male get in a wrestling match with maybe a 10 or 20-pound pup. He'd wait till the little guy grabbed with his mouth maybe one of 21's legs or maybe even 21's tail, and with just the slightest pull by the pup, the father wolf would flop over on his back like he had just been defeated by this little guy. When he played chasing games with the pups, it would be the same way. 21 would deliberately run slow enough so the pups were sure to catch him, he would wait for the lead pup to maybe just try to grab the father's hind leg, and as soon as that happened, he would throw himself on the ground like the little guy had just tackled him. So it was like 21 was pretending that he was a pup himself, certainly pretending that he was not the alpha male. And there were times where I had pretty good reason to believe that he had a sense of humor. He would just run around in front of the pups in circles, and then for no particular reason, just do a pratfall like a comedian, I think, just to entertain them. So it was the golden age of Yellowstone to be able to see all that. Now, 21, as the alpha male, we've already mentioned that it was his job to protect the family. And the next stage of the story was one day when their main rivals came into the valley. That was the Molly's pack from the south. They were a very large pack, very aggressive. They started to come from the southern part of Lamar Valley toward 21 and his family with a lot of pups. 42 organized getting the pups and the younger adults across the park road to the north side of the valley. That was a better position for them. And as I studied how each wolf in the family was positioned, I noticed that I did not see 21 out in front. 42 was out front organizing, leading all that. I noticed that 21 had positioned himself as the very last wolf in the line. And occasionally he would just stop, turn around, look back at the rival wolves as they were running toward 21 and his family, and just very calmly stand there, very calmly just stare at them. Not really in an aggressive way, but to me, it was just him giving him a message. You're here. My family is behind me. I'm here. Don't come any closer. And it worked. They stopped. They were intimidated by what 21 was doing, the way I just described it, and they turned around and left. So that was his style. He was happy to fight. He never lost a fight, never killed an opponent. But if he could avoid a fight, that was the way that he did it. More years went by, and 21 and 42 slowly grew older. They were both born with jet black fur, but like with many married couples, they grew to look even more and more alike as they aged. They were slowly turning gray. Eventually, 42 looked like she had a coat that was the same tone as gray flannel underwear. They were inseparable. They liked to be together. By that time, the two of them were about 3 times older than the next oldest wolves in the family, so they spent most of their time together. They were pair bonded for life. Well, the next big episode in their life involved another conflict. They had left their territory. They had gone west into the territory of the geopack. They had several of their pups with them, but it was a small subgroup of the Druids. They ran into the geode wolves. The geode wolves charged at them. They had a fight. They had several big males in that family. 21 got between them and his family, particularly 42 and the pups. It was fighting it out and winning. Everything was going well for 21's side. As always, he was easily defeating the rivals. But then things got a little bit mixed up and complicated. It appeared that the battle was over, and many of the Druid wolves, including 21 and the younger adults, had started to walk away. Back on the battlefield, it was primarily just 21 and one of his pups. And then suddenly the geode wolves came back for another round. So I think it was maybe 6 geodes charged at 21 the pup. In this situation, 21's priority was to protect that pup. If he was fighting with 3 or 4 of the 6 wolves, the remaining combatants could kill that pup. So he had the pup run away, with 21 staying behind him, always in a position between the pup and the 6 rival wolves. So if any wolf was to be attacked, it would be the father, not the pup. The pup was fast. It was going ahead at a really good clip and looked like this was going to work, but there were several really fast males in the geode pack. They caught up with 21. They jumped him. They pulled him down. A few moments later, all the rest of the geode wolves were on him. So it was a dog pile of 6 adult wolves, all biting 21 at will, with him on the ground trying to protect and defend himself as best as he could. And it looked like this was going to be it for 21. He was an old wolf. He wasn't as fast as he once was. Maybe his fighting ability wasn't quite at the same level that it was. And how could any wolf, even the heavyweight champion, survive an attack by 6 wolves? But if he was to die in the next few moments, he would die heroically because he had successfully saved that pup. The next moment, something happened that I didn't expect. Out of the nearby trees, a whole crew of wolves started to run toward that direction. It was the other Druid adults, led by 42. This time, it was 42 that was going to rescue 21. So she led that whole contingent there. She charged at the geode wolves. They saw this incensed mother wolf coming to save her mate. They didn't want to have anything to do with that angry female. She and the others with them chased him away. But in all that chaos of wolves running back and forth and trying to keep track of who is who, I lost track of where I'd last seen 21 on the ground. I thought that he was so severely injured that perhaps he had limped off to try to recuperate, maybe hiding in the trees or the bushes or something like that. But the longer the time passed where I didn't see him, 42 and all the others came back, I was growing more and more worried, more and more concerned. I was spending so much time searching for him that I lost track of 42, so I wanted to look at her. I found her. She was bedded. She seemed to be tranquil. She seemed to have this attitude that everything was fine. There were no issues. And then I noticed that there was another wolf nearby, about 6 feet away, just standing protectively beside her. And it was 21. And it was the same old 21 that I've been watching for almost 9 years at that point. He appeared to be unfazed, uninjured, unharmed. But what was so great about the story of that particular day was that 21 had been the hero, had been the savior, had been the decisive factor in so many battles with rival packs. This was 42's day. This was the day that she was going to repay 21 for all those rescues. It also made me think of the famous law of the jungle of Rudyard Kipling, the one that applies to wolves. You may remember that it goes something like this: for the strength of the pack is the wolf. Now, certainly in the story of the Druids, the strength of the Druid pack was one wolf, that was 21. But there's more to that. The next line in Kipling's poem says this: but the strength of the wolf is the pack. So in that one day in 21's long career, he needed help. And the help was there in the form of the rest of the pack that he had spent so much of his life protecting and sacrificing for. Well, we're near the end of the story, the emotional part of the story. By this time, these 2 alpha wolves were getting close to their 9th birthday. And you could see that 42 was in decline, 21 was, maybe to a lesser extent. It was the start of the mating season. They got together and had some preliminary courtship behaviors. They had one more mating, maybe one more of dozens and dozens over the course of their life. It got dark. I went home, and it turned out that was the last time I ever saw 42 alive. The next day, I found 21 and all the other Druids, but not her. I'll explain what happened right now so that you'll understand. During the night, we figured out that the Molly's wolves, longtime enemy of the Druids, had come in, apparently had attacked the family. We think while 21 was fighting with this section of the Molly's wolves, a different group of Molly's went after some of the pups and apparently 42. We eventually got the signal from her radio collar about 4 or 5 miles away. He was on mortality mode. So it turned out during the middle of the night, they apparently had caught her, they injured her, they left her, and she probably had died of blood loss. We knew where 42 was. We knew that she had died, but 21 did not. All he knew was that she was missing. So for the next few months, as I followed 21 every day and kept track of where he went, where he traveled, all of his routes, I could see that there seemed to be a pattern. The Druid territory roughly runs east-west through Lamar Valley. I would see him periodically travel along the north side of the ridge of the valley, later go to the south side, go back and forth, visit all their old rendezvous sites, but he never quite went quite as far as we knew where 42 remains were located. He got to within a mile or two, but never quite that far. He was approaching the second week of June by the time our story is coming to a climax, and we could see that he just was not the same old 21. He'd become even grayer. He seemed to have lost his excitement about life. There's a word in the Japanese language that I can't pronounce. It's beyond my ability, but the meaning of it is something like this in English: the reason you get up in the morning, the reason that you want to live on. And it just seemed that whatever you want to call that, he lost it. The last time I saw him, he seemed to have lost all the energy. He was very lethargic. Some of his young daughters were chasing elk. He looked up, and he never bothered to stand and help them. And that was just very, very much unlike 21. It got dark. I went home the next morning. He was gone. We never saw him alive again. We eventually found out what he did the last day, the last night of his life. It's a very emotional story. His book ends with that part of his legendary life. But because it's so emotional, it literally is hard for me to talk about it in public. Plus, I don't think it's fair to destroy the emotional impact of that story when you read it in the full version. So I've decided what I'm going to do is to leave that story for the book.